The playoffs are here, and you can predict the action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Sign up and get a $25 bonus with FanDuel Predicts.
Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18-plus bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with their consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at FanDuel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me. Taxi. Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Remember back in 1976 when America had an oil crisis and the response was President Jimmy Carter urging Americans to just wear a sweater if they were cold? Well, welcome to New York, where the newest frontier of progressive governance is your thermostat. As temperatures soared into the upper 90s and low 100s and the city's concrete canyons radiated like a blast furnace, Mayor Zoran Mamdani offered New Yorkers what may become the single most unintentionally hilarious municipal guidance in modern memory. To ease pressure on the electrical grid, residents were encouraged to set their air conditioners to 78 degrees. That's almost 80 degrees, with City Hall promising that municipal buildings will do likewise. It presents an enlightened civic responsibility, they said. The public treated it as if it was an opening of a comedy act. What's the point of air conditioning if it's set at virtually 80 degrees? New Yorkers, of course, responded with precisely the level of decorum one would expect from a city that once booed Santa Claus, heckled mayors to their faces, and perfected sarcasm as both an art form and a survival mechanism. Within minutes, social media resembled a farm-alive fire of ridicule. The memes multiplied faster than rats on the Lexington Avenue subway. Every comedian in the 5 boroughs may suddenly find themselves unemployed because the mayor himself has begun writing the jokes. Perhaps the finest response came not from a political commentator, but from one ordinary citizen who posed the single most devastating question of the entire controversy. After hearing someone boast that all of her coworkers had proudly voted for Mamdani, she demanded proof that every one of those same coworkers had faithfully set their own thermostats to the prescribed 78 degrees. There it was, one sentence, one glorious challenge. Produce the thermostat receipts. Send us a screenshot of your thermostat. Political virtue is wonderfully inexpensive until it requires personal discomfort. One strongly suspects that many of those proudly proclaiming solidarity with the people's thermostat commissar are sleeping beneath comforters in apartments cooled to a crisp 69 degrees, while publicly extolling the moral superiority of perspiration. It is one of the things to post a hashtag celebrating shared sacrifice. Is quite another to awaken at 3 o'clock in the morning, stuck to one's Egyptian caption sheets like a postage stamp. There's always existed a remarkable gap between progressive rhetoric and progressive air conditioning. One can imagine the conversations taking place across New York City tonight. Darling, we absolutely support reducing energy consumption. Splendid, but set our thermostat to 70. But the mayor said 78. The mayor doesn't live in this apartment. Case closed. There's also something deliciously ironic about asking ordinary New Yorkers to ration cool air while Times Square blazes with enough electronic illumination to signal the International Space Station. Towering office buildings remain brilliantly lit long after their occupants have gone home. Giant digital advertisements consume electricity with the enthusiasm of a casino in Las Vegas. Yet, we're told, salvation allegedly depends upon 95-year-old Mrs. Goldstein out in Brooklyn surrendering 8 precious degrees of comfort while attempting to survive a heat index approximately approaching triple digits. Forgive New Yorkers if they found the arithmetic less than persuasive. This episode reveals something far more profound than an argument over simply air conditioning. It exposes a governing philosophy increasingly convinced that virtually every private decision requires official guidance. Once, politicians confined themselves to balancing budgets, paving streets, reducing crime and ensuring that the lights remained on. Today, however, they aspire to become nutritionists, transportation planners, environmental counselors, parenting consultants, appliance instructors, and now certified residential climate technicians. One half expects next month's directive to include mandatory limits on ice cubes, perhaps no more than 2 cubes per beverage, maybe sparkling water only on alternative Tuesdays, pizza ovens permitted to operate exclusively during off-peak electrical hours, window shades synchronized according to municipal sustainability guidelines. The satire here practically writes itself because reality has become determined to outperform comedy. To be fair, electric utilities have long recommended voluntary conservation during periods of extraordinary demand, but requests are hardly unprecedented. What transformed this particular suggestion into political fertilizer was not the engineering. It was the symbolism. Americans instinctively recoil whenever government appears more interested in supervising private conduct than solving public problems. They recognize, often before politicians do, the subtle difference between governing a city and managing its residents. New Yorkers, of all people, have earned the right to enjoy cold air. They pay some of the nation's highest taxes. They endure some of the nation's highest rents. They navigate construction, congestion pricing, delayed trains, potholes, scaffolding that survives longer than some marriages, and utility bills capable of inducing mild cardiac distress. The least city government can do is refrain from turning down every thermostat and into making an ideological statement. There's an old saying that the road to serfdom is paved with good intentions. It might now be updated for the modern metropolis. The road to political comedy is apparently cooled to exactly 78 degrees. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, millions of New Yorkers quietly reach for their remote controls. They press the downward arrow once, then again, then perhaps a third time for good measure. Some acts of civil disobedience require marches. Others require nothing more than setting the thermostat to 70, pouring a nice cold glass of iced tea, sitting comfortably beneath a ceiling fan, and enjoying the latest episode of municipal absurdity from the cool comfort of one's own living room. If City Hall truly wishes to know how many New Yorkers embrace the people's thermostat, there's a simple solution. Don't ask for polling data, ask to see the thermostats. One suspects the truth is considerably cooler than the rhetoric. Thanks for joining us in the Stone Zone. Americans rightly celebrate July 4th as our nation's Independence Day, but it was 250 years ago today that history records another date that deserves equal reverence. Before Thomas Jefferson's immortal words were formally adopted, before the parchment declaration that would be engrossed and signed over the weeks that followed, there was July 2nd, 1776. It was on that extraordinary summer day in Philadelphia that the Continental Congress voted to sever forever the political bonds that had tied the American colonies to Great Britain. It was on July 2nd that independence became a legal and political reality. John Adams himself believed that July 2nd, not July 4th, would forever be celebrated by succeeding generations as America's great national holiday. In a prophetic letter to his beloved wife, Abigail, Adams envisioned parades, bonfires, illuminations, bells, music, and joyous celebration from one end of the continent to the other. The only thing he was wrong about was the date. To understand July 2nd is to appreciate the extraordinary courage gathered inside the Pennsylvania State House, now revered as Independence Hall. These were not reckless revolutionaries intoxicated by lofty ideals alone. They were merchants, physicians, lawyers, farmers, jurists, ministers, printers, planters, scholars, and businessmen, as well as blacksmiths. They were husbands, fathers, grandfathers who knew precisely what they risked. By voting for independence, they signed what was, in effect, their own death warrant. Should the revolution fail, of course. Every man present understood that conviction for treason meant the hangman's noose. Their property would be confiscated, their families ruined, their names erased from respectable society. Yet one after another, they chose liberty over safety. On July 2nd, 1776, the chamber was filled with debate, prayer, anxiety, and determination. Richard Henry Lee's resolution declaring that these united colonies are and have a right ought to be free and independent states came before the Congress after weeks of discussion. 12 colonies voted in favor. New York, lacking final instructions from its legislature, abstained rather than impose independence. The resolution passed. At that moment, the United States of America was actually born. The remainder of the day was devoted to refining Jefferson's declaration, which would explain to the world why independence had become both necessary and just. Delegates carefully edited language, deleted passages, strengthened arguments, and weighed every sentence with biblical seriousness. They understood they were writing not merely for their contemporaries, but for countless generations to come. John Adams emerged with the day's proceedings convinced that history had forever changed. Tireless throughout the debates, Adams had spent months persuading hesitant delegates that reconciliation with the Crown had become impossible. As darkness settled over Philadelphia, he composed a remarkable letter to his wife, predicting that that day would be celebrated forever with pomp and parade, bonfires and illuminations. His vision reflected not arrogance, but profound gratitude that Providence had permitted him to witness the birth of a new nation. Thomas Jefferson spent July 2nd watching his carefully crafted declaration undergo rigorous revision by the delegates. Congress struck several passages, softened others, removed an extended condemnation of the slave trade that Jefferson had included in his original draft, but some of the Southern delegates objected to. Though undoubtedly frustrated by many of these edits, Thomas Jefferson recognized that unanimity among the colonies mattered more than personal authorship. His masterpiece would ultimately survive with its central truths gloriously intact. Benjamin Franklin, then 70 years old and already among the most famous men in the world, lent both wisdom and calm to the proceedings. His wit frequently relieved moments of unbearable tension, yet no delegate better understood the gravity of the hour. Franklin had devoted decades of diplomacy, science, philosophy, and public service, and he had an eye for the ladies. Now he watched those lifelong labors culminate in the creation of an entirely new republic. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, whose resolution had brought Congress to this defining vote, saw the principle he had championed become law. Although absent during portions of the day because of his family obligations, he carefully worded resolution that he put forward became the legal instrument that transformed 13 colonies into sovereign states. John Hancock presided over the Congress with quiet authority. As president of the Continental Congress, he supervised proceedings that would forever alter world history. Already one of Britain's most wanted men because of his defiance during the Boston Resistance, Hancock knew full well that independence meant there could never be any return to the old order. Samuel Adams, often called the father of the American Revolution, and by the way, he was never a brewer, had spent years preparing the colonies for precisely this moment. Through committees of correspondence, newspaper essays, speeches, and relentless political organization, Adams had helped awaken an American identity distinct from British rule. July 2nd represented the fulfillment of decades of sacrifice by Samuel Adams. Roger Sherman of Connecticut stood among the other few men who would eventually sign all four great founding documents of the young republic. Quiet, practical, deeply religious, and remarkably influential despite lacking formal education, Roger Sherman worked tirelessly to forge consensus among delegates whose personalities frequently clashed.